Hi, everyone. I'm Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible and editor of the digital newsletter Wine Speed. And this is winespeed.com's People to Know, insider interviews with the most important and fascinating people in the wine business. And today we have Will Harlan joining us. Will is the Director of Promontory, the latest in his father Bill Harlan's Napa Valley wine projects. After graduating in 2009 from Duke University with a degree in philosophy, Will began working for a consumer telecom startup in San Francisco and then co-founded equipster, an internet search engine for outdoor gear, also based in the Bay Area. In 2013, Will released the Mascot, and I'm sure some of you have tasted it, a Cabernet blend made from the younger vines at Bond, Harlan, and Promontory. So Will, welcome. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I want to start out asking you about the Mascot because it was, in a sense, your first commercial venture, and you somewhat jokingly say that you wanted to kind of tease out of the Harlan winemaking team some wine that you could have to share with friends in college. But actually you did commercialize it, and I'm wondering why and what you learned from that experience.
Yeah, well, you're right. It began while I was still in school. I would come home for the blending sessions, and I got to learn a little bit more and more over time about how blending worked. And through this process, I was learning about, really which pieces of the vineyard were being included, which pieces weren't. And, every so often we'd come across a lot that came from the younger vines, and it was almost categorically kind of dismissed as not even getting to qualify for consideration for the blend for Harlan Estate or Bond, or we hadn't gotten Promontory up and running yet, but it was through this process that I thought, it'd be fun to put together a little blend of the wines that weren't being used. And really, the majority of the lots that I was taking a look at were from those younger vineyards that were just not quite old enough for consideration. So the idea was, I was never given an allocation of Harlan Estate, to go off and share with friends. Or Bond for that matter. And so this was just an idea that I had to make a little bit of wine, learn more about blending, but make something to share with friends. And so, you mentioned, this really began while I was still in school, but once I moved out to California, moved to the Bay Area to start working in kind of the tech space, I was running into a lot of other, young, interesting people working on, the end of the day, much more interesting things than I was, but I would bring this wine to different parties and different gatherings that we'd have together. And it started a little following there and got to the point where people would say, well, can I buy a case or two or things like that? And at this point, it didn't even have a label. It didn't have a name. It was just, I was bringing these around in shiners. I wasn't making too much, but there was this interest in the wine. And so I ended up going back to the family and the wine growing team and essentially, pitching them on the idea of perhaps making a little bit more, coming up with a label and being able to share this outside of just a very small kind of close-knit group of friends and family. So we can get into that conversation if you'd like, but that was, it took a lot of convincing to kind of get the family and the wine growing team on board with releasing another wine, kind of the positioning of the Mascot.
I bet it did. I bet it took a lot of convincing. Now, you, of course, many people don't realize that your father has been in the wine business for 40 years in the Napa Valley. A lot of people think, oh, Harlan, it started, 10 years ago or something. So you grew up entirely in the wine business and around vineyards, but I guess it wasn't axiomatic that you would necessarily go into the family business. Not everybody does, after all. Or was it? How did you decide? Did you decide, did you always know, or did it take some real thinking?
Well, first of all, I didn't always know. I didn't think that I was going to be in the family business. Growing up in Napa Valley, everyone's in the wine business. You don't have much perspective on how wonderful it is. And as a kid, I had a few other interests, and so yeah, growing up, it wasn't part of at least what I thought my plan was. Looking back, I may see some kind of invisible strings. My dad was never, my parents were never, overly, they weren't coercing me into the business by any means. But as I said, looking back, I can see some little, maybe they were trying to nudge me that way. I think they're certainly happy that now I've come back into the fold, and but yeah, I mean, I majored in philosophy. I got into tech after school. I thought I was going to be kind of in that world, but didn't work out.
Wine combines philosophy and tech, actually, surprisingly, right? So maybe you never really left those fields. But speaking of your father, I want to ask you a question about this, because I've known him for many years, and he's a real, a towering figure in the wine industry. But he also has a reputation, I think it's safe to say, a reputation for being a real perfectionist about things and about everything. Do you too? I mean, did you inherit that, or what's it like working together?
Well, he has that reputation for a reason. He's certainly not an easy person to work for or with, but he has this really incredible vision of something that doesn't exist today, and being able to work on that, and work on making that a reality is really rewarding. And what I'm doing now is, first of all, my dad and I are very aligned on where we want to go, what we want to build, but I feel that every generation is going to have their own interpretation of the vision a little bit. As I said, I think we're very aligned, but how I get there may be a little bit different than how he got us up to this point. I think, the things that he feels are really, really important to focus on and get right, I share that same, belief. But at the end of the day, we, I think we'll have different paths to finding our way to that vision.
Well, you'll be, you're existing in different times, different social times, different political times, different climates. I mean, when your father began, the Napa Valley was an extremely rural place. Most people didn't even know it exists. So it inevitably, you will carry it forward in a different way. But, let's talk about Promontory for a minute, because even though it is quite near Harlan as the crow flies, it's a very different piece of land. And in fact, not surprisingly then, it's a very different type of wine. Describe Promontory for us. It's almost hard to imagine.
Yeah, well, it was hard for us to even kind of wrap our heads around at the beginning. As you mentioned, it's very close by Harlan Estate. It's only a few hundred yards away. But it's completely hidden from view. And so, I grew up in Napa Valley my entire life. Corey Empting, our director of wine, grew up in Napa Valley his entire life. And we spent a good portion of our lives at Harlan Estate, right nearby. Neither of us knew that this place just to the south existed at all. And so when we kind of had the opportunity to first set foot on the property in 2008, it was like, we couldn't believe what we had just walked on. We didn't know this place existed. And so that was it was pretty interesting. We didn't know at that time what we were going to do. We had to make a decision. Is this something that we're interested in? And it was at a little bit difficult time, with the economy and things like that. But we thought, wow, this should be at least pretty good land. It's close by Harlan Estate. We dug hundreds of soil pits to kind of see what was going on, and it looked like it should be pretty good land. It looked different. We didn't know why yet, but no, it was the decisions that led to us originally purchasing the property and starting on the endeavor were made without any idea of what we were going to do with it. We thought maybe this could be a part of Harlan Estate, or maybe this could be, you know, the sixth bond wine. we weren't sure, and so we really spent the first few years just trying to understand the property. And it's within that kind of period of time that we made some of these really much more interesting discoveries about, you know, this property that we had purchased.
Well, there's not even a paved road there, right? It's extremely rugged. It's cooler, excuse me, than, pardon me, than many other parts of the Napa Valley. And I understand it's really rugged, and also is very sloped. It's not gentle in the way that much of the Napa Valley is.
No, you're right. It's our average, just to give you some idea, well, the property itself is about 840 acres. And this is almost all forest. It's, as you said, just one single dirt road in, 840 acres, of which only about 80 are planted to vines. So we have these little pockets of vineyard within the forest, and it is very steep. Our average slope for a planted acreage is almost 40%. There's like high 30s, which, you know, in Napa Valley, that's pretty steep. But we realized that the actual shape and of the topography and everything was pretty important in creating a lot of the microclimate. And you mentioned it's cooler. It's a little bit further south, you know, from Harlan Estate, so, you know, you get a bit more of that marine influence. But it's also a little bit higher in elevation, between about 500 and 1,100 feet. But no, it's just kind of these little pockets of vineyard in the forest. It's a much cooler wine growing environment. So we had to think a little bit differently about our farm.
Sounds like it's out of The Hobbit or something. Star Wars, maybe.
Bit, yeah.
Why do you call it the territory? You don't even. It says right on the label. I have a bottle right here. It says the territory.
Yeah, the Napa Valley territory. So for us, when we were coming up with, you know, the name, trying to capture something that, that captured the ruggedness and the untamedness, and the fact that, you know, here nature takes center stage. You know, the human element is a very small part of this property. We wanted a word that kind of evoked the sense that you got there, and it's not, you know, the word estate just didn't fit. Partially that belonged more to Harlan Estate, you know, let them have that word. But more than that, an estate, you think about, you know, that's where maybe the family home is. It's you know, somewhat, you know, pretty well maintained in terms of just manicured and things like that. Maybe you have paved roads, and you have the winery there. This place was very rugged, very steep. You know, no paved roads. There's no buildings really out there other than a little hunting cabin. And we wanted a word that evoked the scale, but also almost like the feeling that this place had been a bit lost in time. And so you go there and it's almost like looking at a place as it looked 100 years ago, maybe in California. And so the word territory, you know, you have this idea of the pioneers going west and things, and we thought, wow, that's a much better descriptor for this place.
It's a fabulous word, and it really does, I think, evoke the wine. Do you have a good palate, do you think?
It's still a very inexperienced palate in the grand scheme of things, but I'm working on that.
Yeah, well, like all of us, right? The good news is that the remedy to one's palate is to just taste more wine all over the world. So it's not bad homework, as homework goes, I suppose.
I've been doing
you know, sometimes I think for some people, they choose wine, and for other people, in a sense, wine chooses them. And I'm wondering which side of the equation you think you would be on.
I've never really thought about that. I would say, you know, I would probably have to say wine chose me a little bit because I wasn't expecting
Mm,
to really come on board. And, you know, starting with the Mascot, that was just a side project. And over time, that really became my main project. And I realized through that just how much I really loved it. And so I don't know. I think you could say that it chose me.
yeah, it's a nice way to think about it, I think. You know, and then I also wanted to ask you, as we know, we're doing this interview right now at a difficult time, right in the middle of the 2020 COVID pandemic. And of course, with lots of social unrest based on, you know, considerable racism in the country. And I'm wondering if you feel that wine, harkening back to your work studying philosophy, I'm wondering if you think of wine as potentially healing in some kind of way.
I think certainly anything that brings us back to the land and back to, you know, a certain amount of contemplation and just time to really think about things, I think is helpful. Um, and there's something about the cadence of not just wine growing and the seasons, but you know, a lot goes into, especially, you know, buying a bottle, holding onto it for a certain number of years, really thinking about the you know, the experience that, you know, you would bring that bottle out and share it with friends. It's something that brings people together. And I think it can also, you know, soften and open minds a little bit. So I think it can be, I think it can be a great healer, you know, in the right context, for sure.
Perfect. Well, our full interview with Will Harlan is on winespeed.com's People to Know page. Really check it out. It is a fascinating interview. And Will, thank you for today.
Very welcome. Thank you.